January 27, 1973, Paris, France. Representatives of the United States, North Vietnam, South Vietnam, and the Provisional Revolutionary Government sign the Paris Peace Accords. The agreement promises peace with honor, an end to direct American military involvement in Vietnam, the return of prisoners of war, a ceasefire. The war, after 8 years of American combat operations, is over, or so it seems. The accords allow North Vietnam to keep 145,000 troops in South Vietnam. They permit continued infiltration down the Ho Chi Minh Trail. They provide no enforcement mechanism beyond international observers with no authority. The agreement is a facade. Both sides know the war will continue. The only question is when and how. March 29, 1973. The last American combat troops withdraw from Vietnam. 58,220 Americans have died. Over 300,000 wounded. 2,006. 100 remain missing. The United States leaves behind billions of dollars in equipment, thousands of advisors, and a promise to support South Vietnam with air power if the North attacks. That promise will be broken. For 2 years, an uneasy peace holds. Skirmishes erupt. Territory changes hands, but no major offensives. North Vietnam rebuilds. The Ho Chi Minh Trail becomes a highway. Soviet trucks carry weapons and supplies south. Tanks, artillery, anti-aircraft missiles. The People's Army of Vietnam transforms from guerrilla force into conventional military with armored divisions and heavy firepower. South Vietnam struggles. Without American combat support, the ARVN must fight alone. Morale declines. Corruption spreads. Equipment deteriorates. Ammunition and fuel are rationed. The South Vietnamese Air Force flies reduced missions to conserve supplies. Artillery fires fewer rounds. The Americans promised continued aid, but Congress cuts funding. The support dwindles. South Vietnam is slowly being strangled. By late 1974, the strategic balance has shifted. North Vietnam is strong. South Vietnam is weak. General Van Tin Dung, Chief of Staff of the NVA, presents a plan to the Politburo in Hanoi, a major offensive to test South Vietnamese defences. If ARVN collapses and America does not intervene, the offensive continues, all the way to Saigon. The Politburo approves. The target date, 1976, but events will move faster than anyone expects. March 10th, 1975. The dam breaks, 0200 hours, March 10th, 1975. Ban My Thuot, a provincial capital in the Central Highlands, population 70,000, defended by 2 ARVN regiments, approximately 7,000 troops. The city controls Route 14, the main north-south highway through the highlands, strategically important but considered relatively secure. Without warning, artillery fire crashes down on ARVN positions. NVA 130, millimeter guns, 152mm howitzers, rockets. The bombardment is intense, buildings collapse, defences are shattered, then the tanks come. North Vietnamese T-54 and PT-76 tanks, supported by infantry, attack from multiple directions. The assault is overwhelming, coordinated, professional. This is not guerrilla warfare. This is conventional combined arms attack by a modern army. The ARVN defenders fight but are outmatched. They lack anti-tank weapons. Artillery support is limited. Air support is minimal. By dawn, NVA forces have penetrated the city. House-to-house fighting erupts. Civilians flee in panic. The defenders are pushed back, fragmented, surrounded. March 13th. Ban My Thuot falls. The NVA control the city. 2 ARVN regiments are destroyed. Thousands of soldiers killed or captured. Equipment is abandoned. Civilians by the thousands begin fleeing south, creating refugee columns that clog the roads. President Nguyen Van Thieu, leader of South Vietnam, makes a fateful decision. Rather than reinforce and counterattack, he orders withdrawal from the Central Highlands. Kon Tum and Pleiku, 2 major cities, will be abandoned. ARVN forces will consolidate along the coast. The strategy: shorten defensive lines, preserve forces for battles closer to Saigon. The decision is militarily logical, but practically disastrous. The withdrawal becomes a rout. The Convoy of Tears, March 15th. ARVN forces begin withdrawing from Pleiku along Route 7B toward the coast. Route 7B is barely a road, more a dirt track through the mountains, unmaintained, vulnerable to ambush. Military units mix with civilian refugees, families, children, the old and sick. hundreds of thousands of people fleeing the highlands. The column stretches for miles, vehicles, ox carts, people on foot carrying possessions. The movement is chaotic. No order, no control. Units lose cohesion. Officers abandon their men. Soldiers throw away weapons to help. Families. The withdrawal, planned as tactical redeployment, becomes panic. NVA forces attack the column. Artillery. Ambushes. The refugees are defenseless. Thousands die on Route 7B. Bodies line the road. Abandoned equipment litters the route. Vehicles burn. The column fragments into smaller groups, each desperate to reach the coast. March 27. The remnants reach Tui Hoa on the coast. Of 160,000 soldiers and civilians who began the withdrawal, perhaps 20,000 soldiers arrive combat effective. The rest are dead, missing, deserted, or scattered. The ARVN Airborne Division, sent to cover the withdrawal, is shattered. The Central Highlands are lost. The South Vietnamese army has suffered a catastrophic defeat without a major battle. The fall of the Highlands triggers panic across South Vietnam. If the Central Highlands can fall in 2 weeks, nowhere is safe. Refugees flood south. The roads become rivers of humanity fleeing the NVA advance. The strategic reserve is destroyed. The ARVN must defend everywhere with forces already depleted and demoralized. General Deng recognizes opportunity. The offensive is ahead of schedule. South Vietnam is collapsing faster than anticipated. He receives authorization from Hanoi. Continue the offensive. Take the northern provinces. Drive towards Saigon. The original 1976 timeline is abandoned. The war will end in 1975. Hue and Da Nang. The collapse accelerates March 25. NVA forces approach Hue, the ancient imperial capital, defended by the 1st ARVN Division, the same unit that fought so well during Tet 1968. But 7 years have passed. Leadership has changed. Equipment is worn. Morale is low. The division is ordered to hold but knows the highlands have fallen. Refugees are flooding in. The situation is hopeless. March 26. Hue falls without serious resistance. The 1st ARVN Division disintegrates. Some units fight. Most flee. The Marines, South Vietnam's elite, conduct fighting withdrawals but cannot stop the NVA advance. Hue, which required 26 days of brutal combat to retake in 1968, falls in 1 day in 1975. The contrast is stark. The same city, the same enemy. But now the defenders have lost the will to fight. March 28. The NVA approaches Da Nang, population 1 million, including refugees who have fled south. Defended by 3 ARVN divisions, approximately 30,000 troops. Da Nang is South Vietnam's second largest city, a major port, airbase. If Da Nang holds, the northern front can be stabilized. If it falls, nothing stands between the NVA and Saigon but time. The situation in Da Nang is chaos. Over 1 million refugees pack the city. They overwhelm infrastructure. Food runs short. Water is scarce. Panic spreads. ARVN units dissolve as soldiers abandon positions to find their families and escape. Discipline collapses. Looting begins. The city descends into anarchy before the NVA even arrive. March 29th. The last evacuation flights leave Da Nang Airport. US Air Force C-130 and C-141 transports land to evacuate Americans and Vietnamese who worked for the US. The crowds storm the aircraft. People cling to landing gear. Some fall to their deaths when the planes take off. One C-130 crashes on takeoff, overloaded with desperate refugees. All aboard are killed. At the port, South Vietnamese Navy ships prepare to evacuate by sea. Tens of thousands of civilians and soldiers crowd the docks. They swarm the ships. The vessels depart overloaded, listing dangerously. Some capsize. Others make it to sea, sailing south towards safety. March 30. Da Nang falls. The NVA enter a city abandoned by its defenders. ARVN equipment is scattered everywhere. Tanks, artillery, trucks. Aircraft sit on the runway, abandoned. The NVA capture enough weapons and ammunition to equip multiple divisions. The South Vietnamese army has ceased to exist as a fighting force in the north. In 3 weeks, all of South Vietnam north of Cam Ranh Bay has fallen. 14 provinces, millions of people, 2/3 of the country. The NVA suffered minimal casualties. The speed of collapse surprises everyone, including Hanoi. The path to Saigon is open. Washington. America watches. In Washington, President Gerald Ford watches the collapse with frustration. He requests emergency military aid for South Vietnam, $1 billion, equipment, ammunition. He requests authorization for American airstrikes to support ARVN. Congress refuses. The War Powers Act limits the president's ability to commit forces without congressional approval. The American public has no appetite for renewed involvement in Vietnam. The anti-war sentiment is overwhelming. Politicians who vote for aid face electoral backlash. Congress will not fund a lost cause. April 10th. Ford addresses a joint session of Congress. He states, "The war is finished as far as America is concerned. No more aid will save South Vietnam. The fall is inevitable. The only question is how many Americans and Vietnamese allies can be evacuated before Saigon falls." The US Embassy in Saigon begins emergency planning. Operation Frequent Wind, helicopter evacuation of Americans and high-risk Vietnamese. The plan assumes days or weeks to execute. Events will compress that timeline to hours. The Final Offensive, Campaign 275, April 7. General Deng launches Campaign 275. The objective? Capture Saigon by May 19th, Ho Chi Minh's birthday. Symbolic, political. The final offensive to reunify Vietnam under communist control. The NVA commits overwhelming force. 18 divisions, over 150,000 troops, tanks, artillery. The attack comes from multiple directions, from the north, from Cambodia in the west, from the highlands in the northwest. A three-pronged offensive converging on Saigon, ARVN, attempts to defend. President Thieu orders a stand at Xuan Loc, 50 kilometers east of Saigon. The 18th ARVN Division digs in. They have orders to hold at all costs, buy time for evacuations, delay the inevitable. April 9 to 21, the Battle of Xuan Loc. The 18th Division fights with courage and determination. They stop the NVA advance cold. Artillery duels rage. Tank battles erupt. Airstrikes support the defenders. For 12 days, the NVA cannot break through. The 18th Division proves ARVN soldiers will fight when well led and supplied, but it does not matter. While Xuan Loc holds, NVA forces bypass the city. They advance towards Saigon from other directions. The 18th Division is holding one road while the enemy uses 10 others. The sacrifice is brave but futile. April 21. President Thieu resigns. He broadcasts a speech blaming the Americans for abandoning South Vietnam. He is bitter, angry. He accuses the United States of betrayal. He leaves Vietnam, fleeing to Taiwan. Vice President Tran Van Huong becomes president. He is 71 years old. He will hold the office for 1 week. April 22. Xuan Loc falls. The 18th Division has fought until destroyed. Survivors withdraw towards Saigon. The NVA advance resumes. Operation Frequent Wind, the final evacuation. April 29, 1975. 0300 hours. The American Embassy in Saigon. Ambassador Graham Martin receives the order from Washington. Execute Operation Frequent Wind. Begin helicopter evacuations immediately. Saigon will fall within hours. The evacuation has been delayed too long. Ambassador Martin resisted admitting defeat. He believed negotiated settlement was possible. He downplayed the threat to maintain calm. Now there is no time. The NVA are at the city's edge. Artillery shells are falling on Tan Son Nhat Air Base. Fixed-wing evacuations are impossible. Only helicopters can get out. The plan calls for evacuating. Americans and Vietnamese from multiple pickup points across Saigon. The embassy, the defense attaché office compound at Tan Son Nhat, private residences. The helicopters will fly from aircraft carriers offshore, USS Midway, USS Hancock, USS Okinawa, to pickup points, load passengers, return to the ships. Repeat until everyone is out. The execution is chaotic from the start. 0400 hours. US Marines from the Embassy Guard Detachment establish a defensive perimeter around the embassy compound. They close the gates. Thousands of Vietnamese are already gathered outside, desperate to escape. They know if they are left behind, they face imprisonment or death for collaborating with Americans. The crowd presses against the gates. They climb the walls. Marines push them back. Inside the compound, Americans and Vietnamese holding evacuation papers wait. The lucky ones. Those with connections. Those who worked directly for the US. Families of American citizens. The list was supposed to be comprehensive, but in the chaos, many deserving people are excluded. Many undeserving people are included. There is no fairness, only desperation. 0530 hours. The first helicopters arrive, CH-46C Knights and CH-53C Stallions from the carrier fleet. They land in the embassy parking lot and on the rooftop. The rooftop helipad can only handle smaller choppers. The Sea Stallions must use the parking lot. The evacuees rush the helicopters. Marines maintain order. They count people onto each bird. Load capacity is exceeded immediately. The choppers lift off overloaded. Some cannot gain altitude properly. Pilots struggle to control the aircraft. They make it work through skill and desperation. The flights continue throughout the day. Helicopter after helicopter. Land, load, take off. Return to the carriers. Refuel. Fly back. The crews are exhausted. They have been flying for hours. Some pilots fly 12 sorties, 15, they keep going. Because stopping means people die. At Tan Son Nut, the Defense Attaché Office compound evacuates in parallel. Thousands of Vietnamese and Americans gather there. The helicopters land in a parking lot. CH-53s can carry 50 people per flight. They pack in 70, 80, whatever fits. The overloaded helicopters struggle into the air, some barely clear the perimeter fence. Noon. NVA rockets hit Tan Son Nut. The airbase is under fire. Fixed-wing aircraft abandon the runways. An NVA, a 37, a captured South Vietnamese aircraft flown by a defector, bombs the flight line. Chaos intensifies. The Defense Attaché Office evacuation becomes untenable. All remaining evacuees are redirected to the embassy. 1400 hours. The crowd outside the embassy has swollen to over 10,000. They know the helicopters are leaving. They want to escape. They push against the gates. They climb the walls. Some make it over. Marines push them back but cannot stop them all. The compound fills with uninvited people. The situation is out of control. Inside the compound, order barely holds. Americans and Vietnamese with papers form lines. Embassy staff burn classified documents. Smoke rises from chimneys as files are destroyed. Safes are smashed. Equipment is disabled. The embassy must not fall into enemy hands intact. 1600 hours. Ambassador Martin receives orders from Washington. Evacuate all Americans immediately. Priority is US citizens. Vietnamese evacuees are secondary. Martin protests. He promised the Vietnamese who helped America would be saved. Washington is firm. Americans first. Get them out now. The evacuation tempo increases. Helicopters land every 10 minutes. They load Americans, embassy staff, CIA officers, military attachés. The list of Americans still in Saigon shrinks. But the Vietnamese who helped them remain. Thousands crowd the compound. They watch Americans leave. They know they are being abandoned. 1800 hours. Outside the embassy walls, Saigon is collapsing. ARVN soldiers desert. They change into civilian clothes, throw away weapons, seek their families. Police disappear. Looting begins. Government buildings are ransacked. The streets fill with people fleeing or hiding. Gunfire echoes. The city descends into chaos. At the presidential palace, President Duong Van Minh, who took office 2 days earlier when Huang resigned, tries to negotiate surrender. He broadcasts appeals to the NVA, calls for ceasefire, offers unconditional surrender. The NVA ignore him. They want total victory. Tanks continue rolling toward the city centre. 2100 hours. Darkness falls. The helicopter flights continue. The pilots now fly with the night vision goggles. The landing zones are marked with lights. The Marines defend the perimeter with increasing difficulty. The crowd outside swells. Some people try to storm the gates. Warning shots are fired. The desperation is palpable. Inside, the remaining evacuees wait. Hours pass. More helicopters. More people lifted out. But for every person evacuated, it seems 2 more appear. The Vietnamese with forged papers, the ones who climbed the walls, the ones who bribed guards. The embassy is overwhelmed. Midnight. Ambassador Martin is still in Saigon. He refuses to leave until the last Americans are evacuated. He sits in his office waiting for the final helicopter. His deputy has already left. Most embassy staff are gone. Only security personnel and a few essentials remain. 0200 hours, April 30th. Washington sends a direct order to Ambassador Martin. Leave now. The evacuation of Americans is complete. Further flights are for Vietnamese only and will be limited. Get out while you can. Martin finally agrees. He boards a helicopter. The ambassador of the United States leaves Vietnam. But thousands of Vietnamese remain in the embassy compound. They were promised evacuation. They have papers. They helped America. Now they watch the helicopters and wonder if they will be left behind. April 30th, the final hours. 0300 hours. The helicopter evacuation continues, but at reduced pace. The priority is now US Marines providing security. They must be extracted. The Vietnamese will be evacuated as capacity allows. At the embassy, the Marines begin collapsing the perimeter. They withdraw from outer positions to the building itself. The crowd realizes the evacuation is ending. Panic erupts. People storm the gates. They climb walls. They push into the compound. The Marines fall back to the embassy building. They barricade the doors. 0400 hours. The last Vietnamese evacuees board helicopters from the parking lot. The flights become sporadic. The carriers offshore are full of refugees. Deck space is limited. Aircraft are pushed overboard to make room for more helicopters to land. Millions of dollars in helicopters are shoved into the sea to save people. 0500 hours. The Marines receive orders. Prepare for final extraction. Destroy sensitive equipment. Prepare to withdraw. The defense of the embassy is ending. The Marines destroy radios, cryptographic equipment. They prepare demolition charges for classified spaces. Everything that cannot be carried must be destroyed. The South Vietnamese outside the compound watch. They know what it means. 0720 hours. The sun rises. NVA forces are in Saigon suburbs. Tank columns advance down major boulevards. Resistance is minimal. ARVN units have dissolved. The city is open. At the presidential palace, President Min and his cabinet wait. They have ordered a ceasefire, told ARVN forces to lay down arms. There is nothing left to do but surrender. They wait for the NVA to arrive. 0730 hours. The last American helicopter lifts off from the embassy rooftop. On board, 11 US Marines, the final defenders. As the helicopter climbs, they look down at the compound. Hundreds of Vietnamese are still there, waiting, hoping, abandoned. The helicopter flies east toward the carrier fleet. The Marines are silent. They followed orders. They did their jobs. But they leave behind people who trusted America. The guilt will haunt many of them for the rest of their lives. The rooftop is empty. The compound gates are breached. Vietnamese flood into the embassy. They search for ways out that do not exist. They loot what is left. They take furniture, pictures off walls, anything American, souvenirs of a dream that ended. 1000 hours, NVA T-54 tanks crash through the gates of the presidential palace. Tank number 843, commanded by Captain Bui Quang Tan, smashes the iron fence and rolls across the lawn. The tank stops in front of the palace entrance. NVA troops dismount. They rush into the building. President Min and his cabinet are on the second floor. They wait with hands raised. Surrender. An NVA colonel enters the room. President Min states, "I have been waiting since early this morning to transfer power to you." The colonel responds, "There is no question of you transferring power. You have nothing to transfer. You cannot give up what you do not have." 10:30 hours, April 30th, 1975. The National Liberation Front flag is raised over the presidential palace. Saigon has fallen. The war is over. North Vietnam has won. Aftermath. The price of defeat. In the final weeks, over 130,000 Vietnamese were evacuated. Americans, embassy staff, military dependents, those with connections, those who got lucky. Most left on helicopters during Operation Frequent Wind. Others escaped by sea on South Vietnamese Navy ships that sailed to the Philippines. But millions remained. ARVN soldiers, police officers, government workers, those who helped America. They faced what the evacuees escaped: re-education camps, forced labor, political indoctrination. Some were imprisoned for years, some died in captivity. The victors were not merciful. Hundreds of thousands more fled in the years after the fall. The boat people, refugees who took to the sea in overcrowded vessels hoping to reach Thailand, Malaysia, anywhere but communist Vietnam. Many drowned, many were killed by pirates. Those who survived spent years in refugee camps before finding new homes. For the United States, the fall of Saigon was humiliation, a superpower defeated by a small nation. 58,000 Americans dead for nothing. The first war America lost. The images of helicopters evacuating from the embassy rooftop became symbols of failure. The guilt of abandoning allies haunted policymakers and veterans. For North Vietnam, it was total victory. reunification, independence, the American imperialists expelled. The dream of Ho Chi Minh realized. But the cost was staggering. Over 1 million Vietnamese soldiers and civilians dead during the American War, millions more during the earlier war with France, an entire generation sacrificed. The war officially ended April 30th, 1975, but its effects continued for decades. Vietnam remained isolated, impoverished, controlled by communist government. America struggled with the legacy of defeat and the treatment of veterans. The scars remained on both sides. The speed of collapse. The final offensive lasted 55 days, from the fall of Ban Mi Thuot on March 13th to the fall of Saigon on April 30th. In less than 2 months, South Vietnam ceased to exist. A nation of 20 million people, defended by a million-man army, collapsed in the time it takes to plan a vacation. The speed surprised everyone. General Deng planned for a 2-year offensive. He thought 1976 at the earliest. Instead, the campaign succeeded in weeks. The reasons were multiple. ARVN morale had collapsed. Soldiers no longer believed in victory. Corruption had hollowed out the officer corps. Equipment was worn out. Ammunition and fuel were rationed. Air support was minimal. But most importantly, the soldiers knew America would not return. The promise of support was broken. They fought alone against an enemy with unlimited supplies from the Soviet Union and China. The withdrawal from the Central Highlands destroyed ARVN cohesion. Units fragmented, refugees clogged roads, panic spread. Once the collapse began, it accelerated beyond control. Each defeat made the next defeat more likely. The psychological impact was devastating. The NVA offensive was professional and overwhelming. 18 divisions with tanks and heavy artillery, coordinated attacks from multiple directions. The North Vietnamese had learned from earlier failures. They used conventional military power, not guerrilla tactics. They concentrated forces at weak points. They exploited success relentlessly. The ARVN could not match this capability without American support. Lessons and legacy. The fall of Saigon taught harsh lessons. American military power cannot compensate for lack of political will in an ally. Promises of support are worthless without credibility. Wars are won or lost politically as much as militarily. Abandoning allies has consequences that last generations. For the Vietnamese who escaped, the memory remains vivid. The last helicopters, the abandoned crowds, the final betrayal. Many rebuilt, lives in America, France, Australia. They succeeded through determination and hard work. But the loss of their homeland, the separation from families left behind, the guilt of survival when others did not escape, these wounds never fully healed. For Americans who served in Vietnam, the fall of Saigon was bitter vindication, or final tragedy, depending on perspective. Those who believed the war was unwinnable saw the inevitable conclusion. Those who believed America could have won saw betrayal by politicians who abandoned an ally. Both views contain truth. The debate continues. The images endure. Helicopters on the embassy rooftop. People climbing walls trying to escape. Crowds left behind. Tanks crashing through palace gates. These images define the end of American involvement in Vietnam. They symbolize defeat, desperation, abandonment, failure. April 30th, 1975. The war that dominated a generation ended not with a negotiated settlement or gradual transition, but with total collapse and desperate evacuation. Saigon fell. South Vietnam ceased to exist. America's longest war ended in the most public defeat imaginable. 58,000 Americans died, over 300,000 wounded, 2,600 still missing, over 1 million Vietnamese military and civilians dead, millions more displaced, an entire region transformed, all for an outcome decided not on battlefields but through endurance and political will. The helicopters left the embassy rooftop at 0730, April 30th, 1975. 3 hours later, tanks crashed through the palace gates. The war was over. America was gone. A new Vietnam began, and the world watched the most powerful military in history abandon the field of battle, leaving behind those who trusted them to face an uncertain fate. That is the legacy of the fall of Saigon. Not just the end of a war, but the cost of promises broken and the price of defeat.